Hey everyone, and welcome back for another tutorial video in UE4. In this episode we're returning to the splines and looking at this time how to make spline meshes. Now spline meshes are really cool, powerful tools to allow you to create procedural meshes in your game environment, such as these pipes I've made here. So I've made this one here and I made this big one here, which you can actually run on as part of the geometry. Okay, so we're going to go through how to make one of these and how it works, so you can tweak it and change it to suit your needs. Okay, so let's first of all delete what we've got here, and we can start again from scratch. Okay, so to begin with the spline meshes, you'll first of all need a mesh. Now the mesh I've got here is a pipe, and I'll open this up. Very simple pipe I made in Maya very quickly. The only thing you need to make sure you have with your mesh is that in its wireframe, you can see here that it's got multiple segments to it in its length. Okay, the more you have, the more accurate the bend will be. So it'll warp and change the shape of the mesh, but it can only do that if it has enough segments. So if you find that you're getting a lot of breaking geometry when you're doing this, it's probably because you haven't got enough of these points here. You see, I've only got 5 sections, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so that's plenty for me. You don't have to be nuts with it. It'd be quite conservative with it if you need to be. So for this to work, we need to make an actor. So we'll make a new blueprint class, actor, and I'm going to call it pipe spline, and we want to open it up. So the way this works, if you followed along with the last spline video we've done, is we use a spline, and to do that you go to add components and type in spline. Now you don't want spline mesh, not yet anyway, you want spline. Now a spline, for those who didn't watch the previous video, essentially it's a line that is dictated its shape by the number of points on its line. Okay, so if you ever used a pen tool in something like Photoshop or Illustrator, it works exactly the same as that, just in a three-dimensional space. So the way this works is that you will drag out the spline to create a pipe, in this case a pipe shape, any kind of shape you want. And this all happens on the construction script. And the construction script basically runs whenever something about this shape changes or is spawned into the world. And it's very useful for making procedural stuff inside the editor. So for this to work with the construction script, we have to use our spline. So drag your spline component into your event graph to get a reference to it. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to get the number of points we have on our spline. So this one has 2, one at the start, one at the end, and we're going to do a for loop as many times as we need to. So let's first get the number of points we have. So drag out a spline and type in get number of spline points, and that returns an integer number of how many spline points it has. So by default it will stick out 2. Okay, one at the start, one at the end. From the construction script node, we're going to go to a for loop. And the for loop will go through as many times as dictated here on a loop. So the first index will be 0, the last index will be the number of spline points. However, what I want to do is change this value slightly, because if I look at my spline points here, I've got 1, 2 spline points for one section. So to get one section drawn into this by default, I need to take 1 away from the spline points. So if I take away an integer of 1 and plug it to the last index, that means it will go from index 0 and index 1 to add a spline mesh. However, I'm not quite happy with that, because if it's going to add a spline point at index 0, that's this one here, and the next one, which would be spline point 1, it's going to add a spline mesh here as well, which I don't want. I don't want it to have a little tacked on bit here. So I'm going to take another 1 away from it. So I only get 1 point being spawned at point 0. So in your number of spline points, it's going to take away 2, and that's going to go into your for loop. Okay. So in the for loop, we're going to now add our spline mesh. So type in add spline mesh. Now spline mesh is a mesh that can be bent, basically, usually along a spline, but you can bend it slightly using a tangent. Okay, so that's what that is. With it selected, you need to choose which mesh it's going to use. So from the drop down, choose your mesh, in my case the pipe, and then it'll have a return value. The return value is that component we just made. Okay, so this is the output return value. With the return value, we're going to set a couple of things. So first thing we're going to do is set its forward axis, and this determines which direction it's going to be going. If you're unsure which of the directions it's going to be, open up your mesh, look at which way it's facing, and then look at the little gizmo in the corner, and you can see this one in my case is going in the x-axis, so it's going x along there. Okay, if it's going the other way, it would go in the y-axis, but it's not, so it's in the x. So set forward axis will be x, and then also from the return value, drag that out to type in set, start, and end. And the set, start, and end allows you to change how its starting point and its end point, and determine how it's going to bend accordingly. So you've got a load of vectors here we need to input, and that's what we're going to do next. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to access each point on the spline. So drag your spline in from the component list. From there, you want to type in the words get location at spline point. And the spline point will need a point index. That will come from our for loop. So index will go into here. I'm just going to add a little reroute in there, like so. I'm also going to need the tangent. Start position, start tangent, and I can do that too. Just drag it up from the spline and type in get tangent at spline point. Again, hooking up the point index to my little reroute here. Now these two can go into the start position and start tangent. Now to do the end position, I want to get the point index, the next one along. So this is, for example, point 0. I need to get to now point 1, the one ahead, to get the end position. So to do that, you drag from the reroute and go add 1. And do exactly the same again before. So spline here, and I'm just going to copy and paste these two here and hook these up exactly the same, but this time going to the end position and the end tangent, like so, and click compile, and that's it, we're done. I'm going to drag this pipe spline into the world, and there you can see it there. And the way it works is you have the points here which you can click on. The red dotted lines and these are the handles of the tangent, so that's how you control the bend of it, but you shouldn't need to touch them too much. So I can grab the end here and I can move it, and you can see it procedurally changing the shape of the pipe as I go. If I want to make another point, I just hold down the Alt key and move it up, and you can see the spline now bending based on what I want to do. I can rotate these a little bit as well, and you can make the various shapes. As you can see, it has no collision on it, but we can add collision to it quite easily. Just open up your pipe spline component actor, and somewhere after the return value of the spline mesh component, drag that out and go set collision enabled, and hook it up like so. And the type of collision we want is collision enabled, which is the bottom one. And now it's got a collision on it, so I can run around it. Okay. Now, next is to make this a bit more advanced, because at the moment, if I delete that and put another one in and show you what's wrong with this, with something like a pipe, I don't want it to, I want it to be uniform and consistent. So if I were to keep dragging this out rather than adding another point, notice how the end points, the knobbly bits here, are getting larger. They're stretching. It's stretching the whole mesh. Okay, which isn't exactly ideal. It's not realistic and not what I want. Okay, so we're going to fix that now with a different spline actor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply just right click and duplicate what we've just done. Pipe, spline, fixed. So you can see the difference later. So open up a new duplicated one. And the way it's going to work this time is, rather than getting the location at spline point, we're going to work out how far along on the spline we are, and we're going to set a new spline mesh every certain distance. Okay, so we're going to get a distance along the spline point. So we've got a few things we need to do here. First of all, we need to work out how many sections we need. Okay, and the way we're going to do that is by setting up the for loop here a bit differently. So rather than getting the number of spline points here, I want to get the length. So let's take away that and just get the length. And you see get spline length, and that spits out just a float of how long the actual spline itself is. I then want to divide this by the certain number of the section length. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store that in a variable. So go down to your variable list, click the plus variable, and type in section length. Oh, let's misspell it. There we go. This will be a float, and its default value will be whatever the size is of your mesh. To find that out, you can either hover over it and you'll see approximate size 100 by 23 by 24 in this case, or you can open it up and it'll say in the top left hand corner as well, 100 by 23 by 24. So 100 is its X length, which is what I want. So then my default value for section length will be 100. Okay. Okie dokie. So now we've got the spline length, we need to get the section length. We need to divide the spline length by the section length. So drag out spline length and type in divide, float by float, and drag in your section length. This is going to then go straight into the last index here, and you'll get a truncate come up. Truncate basically knocks off the decimal bit. Okay, cuts it off. So now we're going through as many times as we need to based on its length rather than the number of points. So now we're adding a spline mesh component for every single length and doing the same thing we always have done. Now the difference will be we want to change these. So we're not getting the location of tangents at the spline points now. We now want to get is the location at distance along the spline. So if I delete the first one here and drag out from spline again and type in get location, you'll see get location at distance along spline. So drag that in and drag in return value like so, and we'll swap these all out for their counterparts. So get tangent at distance, and I'm going to delete these, copy these, and drag them to their pins. Okay, so now for the distance part. The distance part is going to be our section length times by the index we're currently on. So section length is by default 100. So we're going to multiply int by float, hook that up to there, and then plug that into the distance. And I'm going to do exactly the same again for this bottom one. Like so. Okay. So that works because I'm getting the section length and multiplying it by however far along this line we're going. So the for loop is going along the line. So at point 0, right at the start of it, it's making a spline mesh component, setting its forward axis, setting its collision, and setting the start and end to be, in this case, 0 times bisection length, which is 0, which is correct, it's at the start. Get location and tangent right at the start, and get the next point along, which is 100 along, because I'm doing 100 times 1 this time. 0 plus 1 is 1, times 100 is 100. So that will get me a distance along spline. And then when it goes through the loop again, this one will be 1. So section length at 1 by 100, and section length at 2 by 100, and so on and so forth. So this is the first part, and you can see it work a little bit differently. It's not done yet, but we'll see where it's at now. So if I drag this in, I can move my spline along, and you can see it spawning pieces. Okay, so the next problem, you can see it already happening, is it's still stretching. And that's because the tangent, the red line you see, you can actually see it growing. As I move it along, the tangent moves with it, which is frustrating because I don't want it to move. So what we're going to do is going to fix and clamp the tangent. So that's the next bit. So when we've got tangent being discussed at the end here, with distance along spline, drag out of the vector and do clamp vector size. And drag that to your tangent, and the max for this will be the section length. So drag that in, section length. We'll copy that and put it at the end as well, and hook it up to the end tangent. Now if I spawn him in, I shouldn't get any stretching, which is brilliant, which makes it look more like a realistic pipe. Okay, and I can make new points, make it curve, however exactly I want it to do. Okay, and there you go. So there's one last thing we're going to do, and this is the last thing, I promise you. If I was to drag in a pipe spline, and if I then scaled this thing, you can see it grow massively. Even though all I'm doing is scaling it. Like so. So if I want to make the pipe thicker, you can see it doing it a bit broken and a bit weird. So if I delete that, sorry, show you again, where it's a bit clearer. So I make the pipe thicker, I want to make the mesh thicker. You can see it's just growing it. I want to keep it in proportion, so it's still, so if I multiply it by 4.5, which I have here, I want the distance between each pipe to be 100 times 4.5. Okay, so I'm going to fix that now. And you fix it right at the start of the construction script. And what you do is you get section length and choose set. Like so. And section length will now become section length. Sorry, not section length, sorry. You want to multiply float by float. And you want to get the actors, get actor scale 3D. Split this, because you want just the X, because X is our forward axis. So this will get the scale of it in the X axis, times it by then 100, and that becomes a new section length. So that 4.5 is now becoming 4.5 times 100, which is 450. Okay, click compile. And you can see here, it's now a bit more in proportion. If I scale it up, I can now see, I can now add bits to it. This short bit on the end, where it tacks on a short bit, we can also turn that off if you like. You simply, all you do is where you truncate it, you just take one away. like so. And that way it won't spawn another piece until there's enough room for another piece. Okay. And that is it. That's spline meshes. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time when we do more spline stuff. See ya! Hi everyone, if you do like these videos and you have liked what I've done in the past and want to see what else I can do, all your support is greatly appreciated on YouTube. However, I do have a Patreon set up as well where you can support me even further. Money donated by yourselves will help me make better videos and better content, and more frequently, hopefully. Plus it will help me develop my own projects. Currently I'm in a project at the moment, and I'll hopefully be able to share that with you soon. If you do just choose to donate and subscribe to us on Patreon, you do get access to videos 2 weeks ahead of time, plus there are many other rewards available to you too. So head on over to www.patreon.com/Ryan Laley, and thank you for all your support, and I'll see you next time. Bye.